In 1940, Fortress Eben Emael was one of the most modern and strongest fortresses in the world. Yet how was it possible for 85 paratroopers to take over one of the biggest and most modern fortresses, held by 12 times their number? Now there's a few key reasons for that, and I promise you several of them you have never heard of. One major reason for the German assault method and its subsequent success was due to the actions of a couple of pretty girls, a priest, and a soccer match. On the German side, you had Assault Group Granite that consisted of 85 paratroopers and pilots led by Lieutenant Rudolf Witzig and his second-in-command, Sergeant Wenschel. Of him we'll hear more later. They achieved targets that was considered to be impossible by most at the time. But thanks to excellent preparations and the bravery of the Fallschirmjäger, they forced the entire Eben Emael garrison to surrender with their commanding officer and 1,000 men, at the cost of only 6 killed. So how did they do it? What was the secret of the amazing German success? And what went wrong for the well-prepared Belgians? In the 1930s, a row of defensive forts was constructed along the entire Albert Canal, each of them lying within artillery range of the next. Fortress Eben Emael was located on a high rock side, so it was possible to cover the entire defensive system and the vital Belgian canals and bridges. The fort's location provided excellent visibility, including that of the area near the German border. The fort was manned by around 1,200 troops under the command of Major Jean Jotren, a seasoned army commander. The soldiers were divided into several groups. The first, of around 200 people, consisted of technicians, service personnel, doctors, so forth. The other 2 groups each counted 500 soldiers and were artillerists. The reasoning behind building this fort was the events of World War I, where German forces overran Belgium, and to avoid this happening again, the Belgian army decided to construct a sophisticated and deterring fortress. It took 3 years to build the fortress into the sandstone rock. From 1935, Eben Emael became the core of the Belgian defensive barrier and the central system of defense on the German-Belgian border. The whole complex was surrounded by barbed wire, anti-armor steel barriers, huge minefields, heavy machine guns inside concrete bunkers, and the fort alongside anti-tank guns and artillery positions and casemates and steel domes were positioned everywhere. Eben Emael was shaped like a diamond, with the narrowest point facing north. The floor plan was a triangle, and the total area of military site was 75 hectares, equivalent to 150 football fields. Along its northeastern edge, it was protected by the Albert Canal, some 120 feet below. The northwest section was bordered by a water-filled anti-tank ditch and the Deer River. To the south, the fort was protected by a 30-foot wide anti-tank ditch that was 20 feet deep, and the ditch connected to a series of fortified blockhouses. These were surmounted by observation domes. On each of the blockhouses were armed with 60mm anti-tank cannons and machine guns, covering all avenues of approach. There was only one main entrance into the fort, through Block 1. It was through here that all supplies and munitions would enter the fort. Several Belgian counterattacks were mounted from here during the assault, and it was heavily damaged by Stuka dive bombers. It had a steel observation dome on top. Several projectors could light up the area. It had 2 60mm anti-tank cannons and 4 machine gun firing ports. On the top of the fortress was where the main weapon systems were. There were 2 armored cupolas known as Cupola Nord and Cupola Sud. These featured 12-inch armored domes which would rise 4 feet above the ground to allow the twin 75mm guns to fire at a range of 5 miles in all directions. In the center of the fortress was a non-retractable armored cupola with 2 120mm guns, known as Cupola 120. These were the largest guns of the fort. It was consisted of 2 layers of chrome nickel steel plated armor 59 centimeters thick, It had a firing range of 17 kilometers, and much like a battleship, it reached down several floors below. There were 6 more gun emplacements, or casemates, on top of the fortress, 4 with triple 75mm guns each, with a range of about 7 miles. 2 of the casemates was known as Maastricht 1 and Maastricht 2. They were positioned to fire at targets towards the north, with Maastricht and the vital bridges over the Albert canals were located. There are also 2 positions of Vise 1 and Vise 2. Their guns also covered the forts to the south that protected Liège and the southern borders and bridges across the Meuse River. The final 2 casemates on top of the fortress was Minaud and Misud, armed only with machine guns. Their purpose was to protect the other gun emplacements from infantry attack, in what was thought to be the unlikely event that attacking troops managed to get on top of the fortress. Oh well, about that. In addition, there were 2 blockhouses on the banks of the Albert Canal, and these 2 emplacements could dominate any approach by boat or foot along the canal for hundreds of yards to the north or south. Also, there was a series of observation posts that provided the guns with target information via telephone, radio, and there are also 3 false emplacements made of tin steel sheeting on top of the roof, and there were several anti-aircraft emplacements as well. Deep inside the fort's underground, there were miles of underground tunnels at 2 levels, the intermediate at about 60 feet below the surface, and the lower level of the fortress, which is about 120 feet below the plateau. And of course, they were interconnected by an amazing maze of galleries and walkways. They all served the actual gun emplacements, ammunition bunkers with a system of electric elevators providing a constant supply of ammunition to the guns. Each gun placement was served by a gun crew of 16 to 30 men, depending on the type. The guns were laid on target by simple traverse and elevation, and every target in the surrounding area was accurately plotted, so it would only take a phone call to relay the identified target, and it could be immediately engaged. If a gun emplacement was captured, that complete section could be sealed off from the interior of the fort by a series of armored doors. These were arranged in twin pairs, with a space in between the doors, and could be instantly filled by 8 inches of steel beams and sandbags. And when barred and locked, these armored doors could withstand the attack from the heaviest of conventional explosives that were known to the Belgians at the time. The lower level contained the administrative and accommodations, incorporating showers, mess halls, sleeping quarters, and hospitals. These facilities were at the same level as the ground outside, and through the main entrance of Block 1, all supplies for the fortress would be processed. A few rules of engagement were laid down for Major Jotrin. The guns could only fire on the express command of the Belgian units that were stationed in the surrounding areas, and only on targets specified by them. The fortress commander did not have the authority to fire his guns without permission in the heat of battle. This complicated chain of command would lead to dire consequences when it finally came to it. Furthermore, the guns were forbidden to fire on any targets in neighboring neutral Holland, or without permission. Now, for a German assault onto the west were to be successful, it depended on speed. The success of Hitler's blitzkrieg in the west would depend on capturing the fortress Eben Emael, and fast, not to give the British and French any time to rally and counter the move. Some of his officers believed that an all-out frontal attack or a siege would be successful, but Hitler was not impressed. The entire plan of attack depended on speed. Now, his favorite pilot, Hanna Reich, had told him about the stealth of gliders, and indeed before World War II, the German Air Force, not being allowed to have an Air Force, had trained extensively on gliders. He took an immediate interest and saw an alternative, an innovative solution, and a world first. So he decided on well-equipped paratroopers armed with the new hollow charges that came in two different sizes, a 12.5 and a 50 kilogram. These had proven extremely successful and could be operated by one or two soldiers. Already in February of 1933 had Hermann Göring ordered the creation of a special paratroop unit made up of 14 officers and 400 men. Now Kurt Student put in charge, and he was aware that a parachute drop could not be successful, as the troops in parachutes were totally unprotected against machine gun fire, and they couldn't carry any heavy weaponry either. And an alarmed garrison would have enough time to man all the positions and decimate the paratroopers. General Student put Captain Walter Koch in charge. Now he was an experienced officer, as were the men. He divided his 480-man strong unit into 4 assault squads. 3 groups were assigned to capturing the 3 bridges, and the capturing of the fort itself had been assigned to a 4th one nicknamed Granit, and it was led by Rudolf Witzig. He was only 23 at the time. His unit was formed of 85 men, equipped with 11 DFS-230 gliders. There were 11 pilots, 74 experienced engineers who were also fully trained as paratroopers. Each glider was planned to carry 7 or 8 men, and all equipped with the hollow charges, submachine guns, light machine guns, grenades, Bangalore torpedoes, and flamethrowers. It was almost impossible to hear gliders in flight, and the Germans believed that the Belgian anti-aircraft defenses used sound location arrays and not radars. It would thus be possible to tow gliders to near the Dutch border and then release them, achieving a surprise attack on the Belgian defenders would not be able to detect them. A detailed study of the fort, the bridges, and the local area was made, and a replica of the area was constructed for the airborne troops to train on. Joint exercises between the parachutists and the glider pilots were carried out in the early 40s, and refinements were made to the equipment and tactics to be used, such as barbed wire being added to the nose skids of the gliders to reduce their landing run. And the airborne troops trained with flamethrowers and specialized explosives, the latter of which was so secret that they were only used on the fortifications built for that in Germany and not on fortifications seized in Czechoslovakia, even though they were similar to Fort Eben Emael. But one final piece of information had to be determined before the attack could go ahead. It would have been disastrous for the paratroopers and the gliders if the Belgians had planted landmines everywhere on top of the fort. It would have made the landings impossible, and given how predominant mines were at that time, the Germans certainly assumed that they had. Then, gliders could not land, the paratroopers could not drop, and the mission would have to be scrapped. And it's only due to the most unlikely connection of circumstances that the Germans discovered the Belgians had not mined the roof of the fort. And that is an interesting story. How did the Germans know that they could actually land gliders on the roof of Eben Emael? How did they even know there was a fort here? It all started with journalists. Newspaper article. Took a picture of some construction nearby here. In the background, the Germans spotted they were building a bunker or something to look like it. So they took one of their regular airlines before the war, and they put a camera on it. You know, the regular airline going between Berlin and Paris. They flew over here, and in the clear sky, they saw the Belgian soldiers playing soccer on the roof. So they knew it wasn't mined, because then they wouldn't play soccer there. And we'll go back to, well, why were the soldiers playing soccer on the roof of the whole fort? Well, it has to do with girls. You had all these soldiers here, 500 soldiers stationed, 200 medical. What are you going to do in peacetime when you have 1,200 people rotating in and out of here? Well, a couple of girls nearby, they had an idea. They thought, why don't we rent a couple of rooms here in town? Paint the rooms, a nice cozy shade of red, and have some fun and make some money. And they did. The priest here did not like that very much. Did not think it was a good idea for all his soldiers to go see women of ill repute. So he decided to construct a soccer field. And that soccer ball was seen by German reconnaissance telling them they could land on the roof. That's how it all went wrong. Couple girls, a priest, and a ball. There's a really bad joke walking into a bar. Now, outside entrance 1, there are several administration buildings located. You don't pay much attention to them, but they're still there. Before the war, they were used as offices and administration, and they were supposed to have been emptied and cleared in case of active war. But at the time the Germans attacked Fort Eben Emael, that had not been done. That is important. You'll see why in a minute. And for the same untold reason, I want to take you with me on the journey from entrance 1 and all the way through the fort, up the different levels, through all the different long passageways, all the way up to the fighting compartments near the roof, for a very particular reason. Inside, you'll find a maze of 5 kilometers of underground galleries that are connected to the barracks, to the fighting positions, to the command posts, filtration rooms, air vents, munition storages, and so forth. It's uphill and downhill corridors that all connected with one another, and there's plenty of signs telling the 1,000 Belgian soldiers where to go and where things are, because it is a bit of a maze, and it is a rather long distance from the bottom up to the fighting positions, as you'll see. One of the things that comes to mind here at Eben Emael is how comfortable the officers and the majority of the men really were compared to some of the other forts, where they were literally hot bunking, as in some of the forts in the Maginot Line. This seemed very, very comfortable. Nice wooden walls in between, lots of space, bright. Wouldn't seem like a bad place to serve. An interesting note is that it is only the fighting compartments that were under overpressure to keep out poisonous gas. I don't think any of the forts we've seen so far were buried into sandstone, but it's easy to work with, it's protective, and that's why parts of this fort goes down way deeper than the traditional 30 meters we see. Having built this on sandstone makes it much easier to work with, still durable, and that's why they burrow down from the center. Unlike so many others, they're tunneled in. And I have to give it to them. They have done an amazing job setting up this museum in here. Every room, all the magazines are just full of displays, which is very, very informative. They did a great job here. They really did. It is definitely worth a visit. But it's so pretty and it's so good looking. It's unusual. I don't see anything wet or gray. But honestly, the fort feels spacious. You don't feel confined. There's no claustrophobia in here. You may as well be at a Paris subway. There's plenty of space. It's not cramped. There's technology everywhere, but it doesn't really get in your way. Despite you have the double doors here leading up to the fighting compartments. So this is where the electrical wiring would run up. Very heavy electrical wiring would run up. And the whole fortress was operated by 640 kilowatt diesel engines sitting down at the lowest level. Came up, was covered, and continued. And Brian running in the floor. Were draining down into the fort. This says water transport container, leading electricity to the different weapon systems.
Now, this looks more like what we're used to.
Now, could you imagine if you were a Belgian soldier and you were down at entrance 1 when the alarms sounded, and you had to make your way all the way up through the various hallways and staircases in order to get to your position? We've been walking for half an hour, and I haven't even seen sign of a cannon or a gun.
Cemented walls with proper hooks for wiring cables. It looks like it. And then you have first access doors. That is now missing. I would imagine, I'm certain, there would have been a steel door here. There would have been a steel door here.
It is the 10th of May, 1940, when all gliders are in the air. 30 minutes past midnight, Major Jotre was roused from his sleep by the telephone, an officer informing him that all of Belgium had been put on a state of alert, as Germans had been spotted near the border. Jotre was not particularly concerned, as these alerts had sounded 3 times within the last few days. Yet he drove to the fort. As he arrived, the garrison was still leaving their barracks. There are around 780 soldiers inside the fort, as the rest of the troops were on annual leave in the hospitals and placed in temporary quarters in surrounding villages. Many of the officers had families living in their own homes nearby. On the German side, something started with going wrong. 2 gliders went missing as their towing cables were prematurely detached or broke, one of them carrying Lieutenant Witzig, the commander of the operation. He would not reach the fort until 8:30 a.m. Despite the loss of the commander, the attack went ahead. No problem. That's what they trained for. Major Jotran arrived as Belgian soldiers watched as several unmarked planes circled in the dusk above. He confirmed the alert with Liège. Now, according to standing orders, he ordered several of the gun crews to clear out the 2 administration buildings outside the entrance. Now, several of the gun crews from Minaud and Missoud, as well as half of the other gun crews, were helping emptying the buildings, all the way downstairs on the ground level by entrance 1. More soldiers were stationed at Wonk nearby, and they could be summoned by a predetermined signal of 20 blank warning shots fired in sequence. The remaining gunners still in place were unfamiliar with the firing procedure, and some of the guns had their firing pins removed after maneuvers. After an armor had finally replaced them, it was now 02:30. After all this had been done, Kubla South started firing the alarm shots, but the firing set the camouflage netting on fire, so the soldiers had to put that out first. That meant the firing sequence was interrupted, so many of the Belgian soldiers did not respond. Now you're beginning to see some of the issues Fort Eben Emael was beginning to have. And without orders, some of the gun crews were reluctant to open fire at all. Some had no ammunition unpacked, and some of the gun stations were completely empty because the crews were emptying the administration buildings. So when they did open fire, 2 guns jammed immediately. Initially, one Belgian officer thinks the planes are British Reconnaissance. The first glider now lands on the roof of the fort and runs over one of the machine gun positions before sliding to a halt, and the first German paratroopers run out, and the assault on Eben Emael has begun. The other positions open fire, but one runs out of ammunition after already 50 rounds. The gliders of Sturmabteilung Granite lands within seconds of each other. Sergeant Wenzel's glider suffers a hard landing and slides to a halt 80 meters from gun position Minaud. As the commander have not landed, Sergeant Wenzel takes command. But it's important to remember that there were 3 other assault groups that landed that day, over the 3 Belgian bridges that were so important to take for the invasion to work and the timing to work out. The 3 assault groups they landed by the 3 Belgian bridges They scrambled to remove the demolition charges before the Belgian defenders had a chance to blow them up. However, at the bridge of Caen, it was demolished just as the gliders approached due to one particularly alert Belgian soldier. One of the gliders lands just yards in front of one of the Belgian blockhouses and several are wounded. However, the other two bridges are taken intact. After 40 minutes, German paratroopers jumped by the bridges also. And it's important to note that the Germans had infiltrated these areas in the nights before in civilian and Belgian uniform. It was that important to take these bridges intact. However, the loss of that one bridge will slow down the relief force for the Jägers at Fort Eben Emael. Wenschel's units hit by machine gun fire coming from gun position Minord. Its vision and firing ports dominate the landing grounds, posing a serious threat to the paratroopers out in the open. Wenschel grabs explosive charges and rushes the position, followed by several of his men carrying a 50-kilogram shaped charge. Wenschel approaches, the machine guns go silent, and he sees the shutters are now closed. The Fallschirmjägers with a 50-kilogram charge climb aboard Minord, and Wenschel sets a small charge onto the periscope. Both blasts kill two and wound several occupants. One of Major Jothron's officers gives the wrong orders, believing the Germans attacking from the countryside and not from the roof. Now the defenders scramble to the outskirts of the fort, while another glider hits the ground 20 meters from Cupola Nord. The defenders of Minord seals the position and retreat into the fort. The other important position, Misud, is not even occupied, as its crews were busy emptying the administration building. Wenschel now searches the bunker. When the telephone rings, he picks it up and hears Belgian voices. In English, he replies, "The Germans are here," to much consternation on the other end. The Jägers have now overcome the first major obstacles in barely minutes after landing. The anti-aircraft building has 4 machine guns but 2 jams before firing a single shot. One was knocked out by the glider hitting it, and the last one just runs out of ammunition. The Belgian ammunition containers are still sealed inside the fort. Troop 5's commander Evan Hogg leads his men to attack the anti-aircraft position, quickly overwhelming the Belgians inside. That clears the way for the primary objective, Cupola Nord, with its retractable armored emplacement with twin 75mm guns, capable of firing 360 degrees and capable of firing canister rounds, something that would be very detrimental to the paratroopers' health. 150-kilogram charge is placed on the roof and a 12.5 kilogram on the door. A Belgian brigadier general is killed and 4 soldiers wounded. Then one more 50-kilogram charge on the cupola, and the Germans finally destroy the mechanism and its electrical. The surviving Belgians seal the position. Group 8's commander is killed while attacking Block 4, yet the detonated 50-kilogram charge which destroys the observation dome, rendering Block 4 useless. Troop 9 now attacking their objective, Misud, not knowing it's empty. It too is destroyed. And Fritz Heinemann assaulting a northern cupola, which he discovers is a fake, yet he still destroys it, signaling its destruction. Troop 3 circles several times before sliding gracefully to a hold just 25 meters from Maastricht 1. They detonate a 12.5 kilogram charge at the base of the 75mm guns. 1 Belgian soldier dead and several wounded, including the commander. The rest retreat downstairs. A German commander follows them and reaches the reinforced door and can go no further, for now. Troop 1's glider hit the ground hard near Maastricht 2. Their commander, Niedermeyer, detonates a 50-kilogram charge on the dome and a smaller charge at the embrasure of one of the 75mm guns. Both are destroyed, and 2 more Belgian defenders are killed. Maastricht 2 is secured, and it's only been 20 minutes since the attack began, and 5 of the fort's gun emplacements, as well as the anti-aircraft batteries, are all destroyed. But there are still almost 1,000 men strong Belgian garrison inside, and at this point 12 Germans are wounded with 2 killed. Major Jothron radios the 2 supporting Belgian forts to start firing on his back. Over 1,000 artillery shells are fired from the 2 forts, but the Fallschirmjägers are mostly unhurt, because they shelter in the forts they have taken. But they must still take out the remaining positions. Soon, the main invasion force will approach, and there are still Belgian guns capable of firing on them. Now, Troop 10 arrives, providing reserves and supplies, and most importantly, a radio. And at 4:50 hours, Stuka dive bombers start spotting swastika flags over several positions, and not wanting to risk hitting their own men, they target the forts round the edges. At this point, Vise 1 and Vise 2, as well as Cupola 120, are still in Belgian hands and operational. First, Wenschel attacks Vise 1, placing a 12.5 kilogram hollow charge by the guns, destroying them, and the Belgian soldiers inside retreat underground. Supplies are now dropped among the falling Belgian artillery shells, and Wenschel sends out several Belgian POWs to retrieve the canisters. The glider of Troop 6 have landed in barbed wire. They're trying to untangle themselves as they are pinned down by Belgian machine gun fire. Here they dig in. All the German units are independently trained and know what their individual target is, so no one has noticed that Cupola 120, the most powerful of the fort, has not been attacked since the two gliders with that objective assigned have not arrived. Now, inside, Marshal Kramers, the commander, sees a group of Germans, and he opens fire with his rifle. He wounds one German and one Belgian soldier. Wenschel's men sticks 1 kilogram charges into the 120mm barrels, blowing out the breeches of the guns. The Belgians initially retreat, however, they will return and repair the damage. Vise 2 is now the only intact and firing, but cannot really affect the battle as it fires to the south. The Germans blow up Block 2 just as the Belgian soldiers mount their very first infantry attack. It's limited, and they retreat to the fort. The Belgian garrison several times would mount attacks on the German paratroopers, but are pushed back and inside every time. Yet now Cupola 120 turns again, initially unnoticed by the Fallschirmjäger, except for one, who's sitting on top of it, drunk. But now the 120mm gun is turning, and it could fire at the German troops attempting to cross the river, who are now sitting ducks if Cupola 120 were to open, but Major Jothran cannot get permission from his superiors, so the commander of Cupola 120 takes no action. At 8:30, Commander Witzig finally lands and takes commands. He sees the danger and immediately orders his men to destroy Cupola 120 with a 50 kilogram charge. At 11 o'clock in the morning, Pioneer Battalion 51 and Infantry Regiment 151 should have arrived at the fort to relieve the paratroopers. But due to the bridges have been blown, they are late, and the Jaegers are now running low on supplies. Also, repeated Belgian counterattacks have been attempting to relieve the fort, but due to the Belgian fire and the German Stukas strafing them, only 15 exhausted men arrive. And several more Belgian counterattacks fail throughout the day as well. Now, the German, fearing more Belgian counterattack, goes down into Maastricht 1, where they found the initial bolted and barred armored doors. Here they attach a 50 kilogram hollow point charge to the steel beam barrier and run for their lives up the stairs, all the way up the stairs, waiting for the 1-minute fuse that was cooking. The explosion completely demolishes the armored doors and kills 4 Belgian soldiers and wounds several others. The blast also destroys the staircase and the ammunition elevator. In the afternoon, Battalion 51 is attempting to cross the canal, but they are stopped by heavy Belgian fire coming from Canal Nord. Witzig tries to aid the crossing by lowering charges next to the blockhouse, but with no luck since he cannot attach them. So Battalion 51 have to wait for nightfall before making it across to join up with the Jaegers. However, after the large, vast detonation in the elevator shaft at Maastricht 1, several bottles of chloric lime has broken. It gives off toxic fumes. The hospital is right underneath the shaft where the hollow charges were placed. Many of the Belgian soldiers were World War I veterans. They believe the Germans are attacking with gas. This is one of the major reasons why Major Jothran now holds council with the senior officers of the fort, and at 1500 hours, May 11, Fortress Eben Emael surrenders. Sturmgruppe Granit has suffered 6 dead and 18 wounded out of their 85 men, and the Belgian losses are 23 dead and 59 wounded. 989 men surrender with their commander. It's always a tragedy when fighting men die. Given the low numbers, one could only wonder how much higher they would have been had this been a full frontal assault or a long siege. But a world first in history had now been set on how highly skilled, well-trained soldiers could attack from above and take impenetrable fortresses and objectives. And the Belgian defenders, many of them fought and died where they could, but they were let down by their logistics and their pre-battle planning. And as we continue down the hallways, we get down to the bottom of Maastricht 1. This is where the German paratroopers came down a second time after repeated Belgian counterattacks. They placed a shaped charge on the double doors. They were supposed to have been closed, filled in between with steel beams and sand. That did not quite happen, and the damage is absolutely considerable, and it is staggering to see, even behind the shaped charge, the damage to the ammunition elevator and the staircase. It was completely ruined, and 4 Belgian soldiers were dead, with more wounded. And you see in the wall opposite, even though it didn't penetrate, it is full of blast damage.
Shrapnel.
No, it's just pressure.
Just pressure, so nothing, just blast wave.
Just pressure.
I would have thought it would have been pieces of that door. Wow.
A little bit, but most of it is just pressure.
It was an overpressure?
No, that's upstairs.
Upstairs, so only the fighting compartments are
Yeah.
over. Okay.
They were closed with the special doors like that.
Yep. Because there's still a little rubber left.
In the other doors in the casemate, they were really nice still.
I guess I'm gonna have to find a way. Wow. This was from one of the German shape charges.
Normally the door was closed when the Germans came into the fortress. This door is also closed like that one, but all full of sandbags. But because of the panic and all that stuff during the attack, they didn't close the door like it's supposed to be.
Oh.
So they put the steel barrows like there. They closed the first door, they put the steel barrows, but they didn't fill the room with sandbags.
So the
like
sand would have been up here and would dump down.
Yeah.
Outstanding. That's how they lost a lot of battleships, because somebody forgot to close doors.
Yeah, it was just because of the panic.
I know, that's what happens when you panic. And this is this sleeping bunks?
No, that's for resting.
That's for resting.
And as we had made our way from the ground floor through these miles of hallways, we're only up to the second upper floor. We have not even reached outside yet. Could you imagine being stuck downstairs in the administration building, having to make it up to your battle position? And incidentally, this walk was considered so punishing that when the waste buckets had to be emptied up on the roof, the punishment for falling asleep by the benches was hauling the waste buckets up the stairs.
Staff here are really, really nice and really friendly and really knowledgeable about what happened in the fort. Access tunnels. Well, here, as you see in every hallway, now we are going down. We are going down there. I hurried while battle was going on above me, which these are very narrow steps. Granted, people were shorter back then, but this is interesting because I can barely put 1 foot on the step, so you will always step down by the center of your foot. Staircases are fickle, and I would not be surprised if some of the cases in the infirmary have been from walking down and then falling down these stairs. That is not the most comfortable staircase in the world. If that's a firing position, that is very, very small. Very small utilitarian room. And I would say this is for inner close defense. After the war, the Germans really never occupied the fort. They had some weapons testing, firearms utility testing here, but they didn't occupy it, and there was no fighting for it in 44-45 when the Americans crossed into the territory. So that's why the fort is preserved. What is this? This is the blast door from here. Yeah.
As we're back down to ground floor level, here at Block 2, the infantry exit entrance, you'll see a lot of damage from battle and explosives. However, it was not really from the battle. Block 2 was not efficiently able to effect the battle on the roof, but the Germans of course blew it up anyway. However, a few days after the battle, they returned here to shoot a propaganda movie. But, not wanting to give away the secrets of the hollow charge, they filled it with conventional explosives and filmed it and blew it up a lot. Block 2 had machine guns, projectors, anti-tank guns facing in two separate positions, but none of them could really affect what was going on the roof where the paratroopers had landed. However, of course, it had to be destroyed, for the land forces that were soon to arrive could be endangered by the firing from here.
Very heavily. The fort in Eben Emael was designed in the late 20s. It was built with World War I technology and warfare in mind, and that presented some problems. It was continuously upgraded and refurbished, and other forts around here was also built to support it, but this was the first one. I don't think it was battle damage. Very little fighting went on in this particular area, so this was the blast damage.
Of course, the damage had been covered up, but this is from the explosive after the propaganda movie had been filmed, not a shape charge.
It's part of the waterways surrounding the fort. A lot of forest here now, and again, a lot of steps leading upwards. Researching history always seems to be a walk uphill. Did I mention there's a forest on top of the fort? Well, there is. Something large sitting up here. There would not have been this amount of foliage right in front of the firing arc of the cannons.
This is Maastricht 1. It is attacked by Assault Group 3. Initially, they tried to place a 50-kilogram shaped charge on the embrasures. Because of the shape, that's impossible. So they put a 12.5-kilogram charge right by one of the guns. It blasts a hole into the wall, killing one Belgian, wounding several others. The paratroopers jump through the hole. The Belgians retreat down below. One of the paratroopers follows them until he gets to the locked double doors. They will be revisited later, when eventually they return after countless Belgian counterattacks, and put a 50-kilogram charge there, as we've just seen.
Now, for those of you who used to sitting at home with a history book or looking at documentary, the Battle of Eben Emael, you look at these little sketch drawings of the fort, and from that perspective, it doesn't look that big. This area is huge. Be absolutely make no kidding. We've got 5 kilometers of underground hallways here. This is enormous, this property. No wonder they had rooms at both the soccer field and for the Germans to land their gliders. Holy hell. This is a lot larger than from the pin drawing you see. Damn. Before the war started, the military here wanted to build little moats around some of the larger bunkers here, but the politicians said no, didn't need it, you can fight them off. That's what you have the machine gun cupolas for. Of course, what they hadn't expected was the Germans to land in between those and in short order blow them up. You have a cupola on top of here, one more here, and there.
Troop 9 assaults Missoud, but remember, it was empty. It was never manned by the Belgian soldiers busy down in the administration buildings. Still, the paratroopers tried to place a 12.5 kilogram charge at the embrasure by the machine guns. However, it doesn't fit. So eventually, they just place a 50 kilogram shaped charge right on the wall next to the machine gun, taking it out completely. And you still see that damage today, although bricked up somewhat.
I am walking the field on top of Fort Eben Emael. You have no idea how large this roof is. And I keep repeating myself on that one because it really is. I don't even know if a top view will give you an idea. Now this bunker right here would have had a clear field of fire of the German gliders that was landing here on top. This must have been one of their first targets. Because the field is right here.
And that is exactly what happens. The Belgian artillerists inside are firing their machine guns at the paratroopers. Sergeant Wenzel and 2 of his men charges Minaud. He places a 1 kilogram charge in the observation cupola. That results in more fire from the Belgians, whereafter a 50 kilogram shaped charge is placed on the dome and 1 on the back. That ends the resistance from the Belgians here, who retire down below.
There's a machine gun in firing position. All the top of the fort.
Vise 1, another artillery position with 3 75mm cannons, is now attacked by Sergeant Wenzel's men. They place a 12.5 kilogram charge under one of the guns and destroys it. The Belgian crews retreat downstairs. Here I am on the roof of Vise 1, which gives a pretty good lookout over the area.
This is not what I expected. I think I expected it to have been smaller.
Another great danger to the paratroopers who've landed in the center of the fort is Cupola Nord. It has 2 75mm cannons, can rotate 365 degrees, and it can fire canister and explosive shot. Troop 8 attacks it, places a 50 kilogram charge on top of the dome. It explodes, but only stuns the defenders. Thereafter they run down to the front, place a 12.5 kilogram charge on the door facing the interior plateau of the fort. That explodes, killing a brigadier general of the Belgian soldiers. Thereafter a 50 kilogram charge, another is placed on the dome once more. That is set off and finally disrupts the electricity to the fort and the dome, and the remaining Belgians retreat to the interior of the fort. I always thought it was a little strange that there was a door facing a potential direction of attack, namely the center plateau of the fort. It tells me that the Belgians really did not expect a landing or paratroopers to assault, which would essentially be through a back door, and also not seeing a machine gun position here.
This is the first time I'm at Eben Emael, and I really don't know what I expected. I knew it was large, I knew it was well fortified, but that it was this large with this many positions, and I am very impressed with this, I will say.
In the center of the fort, you have the most powerful cannon system of the fort, Cupola 120, equipped with a pair of 120mm cannons that could seriously disrupt the landings and the Germans crossing the bridges. Initially, it had not been noticed that Cupola 120 was still active, not until its commander had started laying rifle fire on the Germans outside, whereafter Sergeant Wenzel had his men put 1 kilogram charges down the barrels, blowing out their breeches. However, the Belgians managed to repair one, and it wasn't until Commander Witzig landed and he noticed the flaw he had it put out of action for good. The glider of Assault Group 1 lands hard, but assaults Maastricht 2. Much in the same way, a 12.5 kilogram charge is placed at the base of one of the cannons. Group 1's commander Niedermeyer jumps on top of the roof and places a 50-kilogram shaped charge on the observation dome, killing 2 Belgians inside. The remainder flee inside the fort.
And clearly this shows signs of having been hit. And here you see the German shaped charge having been placed on top of the cupola. Now, it didn't penetrate, but I'm pretty damn sure that the concussion killed whoever was inside. It's been hit by various munitions as well. Some deeper, some smaller. And I do wonder a little bit what it was that hit it. It almost looks like a crack, but that would be impossible.
Cupola Sud, another racing steel dome with twin 75mm cannons, and now attacked by Assault Group 5. They place a 50-kilogram shaped charge on top of the dome and believe the job is done, but the Belgians inside do try to repair the damage.
This has definitely been refurbished. And then down there are our walls. It took battle scars, so this is the original turret. The barrel of this cannon is frayed, so definitely this took hits. And on top of it, there's the impact of another shaped charge. Right here. It is nice that they have preserved the roofing of this bunker. I imagine some of it was destroyed, but also cement bunkers without weatherproofing. It destroys the concrete, the cement over time. And to preserve this as a very valuable historical monument, it's important they spend the time doing those things to make sure it lasts for the next generation. So I'm all in favor of authentic restorations. A very small little, looks like an observation turret on top of a bunker sitting here with a very pockmarked wall. Definitely shows marks of battle. Only something hit this wall. A very small observation dome. It does look purely as for observation. It is not a very large turret. It takes forever to walk around, and you can actually get lost walking around here on top of it. Bring compass and water, remember? That is a bomb crater, if I've ever seen one. And they were attacked from the air. So the final fort on the tour of pre-World War II, World War II forts, underground, above ground, forts, bunkers, fighting positions. This is absolutely fascinating. And now I have to try to make a judgment based on what I've seen for the past few weeks, of which had the best idea, which was the toughest, which was the best planned, which forts would I like to fight in 1940 of all the ones I've seen. And that's hard. I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna eat something, drink something, I'm gonna have a cigar, and I'm gonna make thoughts and plans and see if I can lay it out for you, but you should definitely visit all of them, and I will tell you why.
All great fortresses will fall, either as logistics, politics, poor planning, being starved, ordered to do so, or their standing orders are, let's face it, crap. But sooner or later, if you're surrounded, you're starved, they will wait you out on the outside, and you will run out of supplies on the inside. But there are thousands of amazing forts around the world, and I want to visit them all to see which one had the best idea for survival longevity. I take it that you're all coming with me on this journey.